Bucharest, December 21st, 1989. Nicolae Ceaușescu steps onto the balcony of the Central Committee building. He's ready for his speech, live on national television. For 20 years, the people under his rule have been loyal, obedient. Today should be no different. Factory workers under threat of being fired have been bussed in from across the capital. They've been ordered to gather, wave flags, hold posters, and cheer for him. Television cameras are set, microphones ready. He raises his hand. He starts to speak.
Dragi tovarăși și prieteni, cetățeni ai capitalei României socialiste.
He doesn't know this will be his last speech. After a few minutes, something unexpected occurs. The applause dies. Then, a sound Ceaușescu has never heard before. Screams, then boos, so loud they drown his voice. He stares at the crowd, frozen in shock. Something is very wrong. For decades, he has heard himself praised as a savior by them. Now he looks small, confused, frightened. The crowd erupts. The state camera tilts upward, a standard procedure in case anything unexpected ever happened. He shouts,
Alo! Alo! Alo!
Again and again.
Așezați-vă liniștiți!
Ceaușescu calls it a provocation.
Asta e o provocare.
But in the streets, protests are already spreading. The police and army open fire on the people. By morning, trucks wash blood from the pavement. Hundreds are dead. 2 decades earlier, his people had cheered for real, for walking away from the Soviet Union, for getting closer to the West, for building factories, for giving them homes and hope. But then the reformer became a tyrant. He began calling himself the genius of the Carpathians. His wife, Elena, barely literate, was suddenly a world-renowned scientist, the mother of the nation, with their portraits now filling every office, every classroom. What had once seemed like a bold leader had become a despicable one. Outside, especially reality, was heartbreaking. While the Ceaușescus for dinner ate steak and caviar, people trampled each other for scraps of ration food. While the Ceaușescus lived in palaces of marble, silk, and gold, ordinary Romanians, in winters, sealed windows with plastic to keep the wind from entering their apartments. Rationed water between washing, laundry, and flushing toilets, and lit candles to see in the dark. The police beat citizens. His abortion ban filled orphanages with abandoned children. Some begged in the streets, some hid in sewers to stay warm. Others were sold abroad by desperate mothers. By the late 1980s, Romanians have nothing left to lose. The next day, protests resume. Soldiers refuse to shoot and join the people instead. The Ceaușescus are forced to escape with a helicopter. On December 25, 1989, Nicolae and Elena are captured and tried by a military tribunal. The trial lasted 55 minutes. They are taken outside, standing against a wall. Decades of forced silence finally find its voice. In the fire of 100 bullets against the two, it's freedom. During World War II, Romania is a giant supplier of wheat, corn, and oil. Its fields feed the German army, and its refineries fuel Hitler's tanks as they advance through the Soviet Union. By 1944, the tide turns. What looks like a victory turns into a loss. Germany retreats, and Romania retreats with it. The Soviets, advancing toward Berlin, occupy most of Eastern Europe. When they reach Romania, they force its king to surrender, installing a puppet communist regime loyal to Moscow. The Romanian trains filled with oil, timber, and metals now no longer head west toward Berlin. They head east toward Moscow. Through the so-called Sovrom agreements, Romania sends raw materials to the Soviet Union, which in return delivers obsolete industrial machinery sold back at several times its value. Officially, this is industrial cooperation. In reality, Romania has simply changed master. By the early 1950s, an ex-factory worker, Gheorghe Gheorghiu-Dej, has consolidated full control of the puppet Communist Party. Under his rule, Romania follows the Soviet model, collectivized agriculture, nationalized enterprises, and rapid industrialization. Gheorghiu-Dej forces peasants off their land and into the cities, orders steel and chemical factories to be built across the country, and to supply them with workers, surrounds them with identical gray apartment blocks, cramped with thin walls and identical furniture. Apartments are assigned based on the number of children. The more kids a family has, the larger the space they receive, and only 5 or 8% of their salary is deducted to pay for it. Life becomes structured. People are told what to do and they do it. There is little freedom except in choosing which factory to work for when they grow up. But for most of these former peasants, this is progress already. They have electricity, running water, a salary. For the first time, their children can study and live in a city. By the mid-1960s, industrial output has multiplied many times over. Romania is now an almost urban state in full transformation. In 1965, Gheorghe Udej, though, dies. His successor, an unknown party secretary, Nicolae Ceaușescu, comes to power. Born in poverty, Ceaușescu is the son of a peasant, a shoemaker's apprentice, who joined the communist youth as a teenager and has already been imprisoned several times for his political activism. At first, Ceaușescu hits differently. He speaks of independence and renewal. He promises to modernize Romania while keeping Moscow out. To everyone's surprise, he keeps his word. In 1968, when the Soviet Union invades Czechoslovakia to crush the Prague Spring, Ceaușescu, standing before hundreds of thousands in Bucharest, declares, "Each nation has the right to decide its own path of development." He condemns the Soviet Union publicly, a communist leader who has just dared to defy Moscow and come out alive. The people cheer him. The West admires him. Charles de Gaulle calls him a man of courage. Richard Nixon visits Bucharest in 1969, the first American president ever to visit a communist country. Romania soon joins the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to obtain development loans. For the first time, because of Ceaușescu, Western cars, technology, and credit enter the country. Jeans and Coca-Cola appear in stores. Not that Romanians can afford them yet, but they represent openness. Factories expand, wages rise, and through the late 1960s and early 1970s, Romanians celebrate. At this moment, Ceaușescu is seen as a good communist leader who brings prosperity. But beneath this image, something else is forming too. Ceaușescu begins to demand that his speeches be broadcast in full and that applause lasts longer. He reviews photographs before publication, ordering retouching and insisting his height appear taller. He replaces old party members with family and friends. His wife, Elena, barely educated, just 4 years of elementary school, now appears at his side at every event, introduced as a world-renowned scientist. He enjoys the stage lights, the orchestras, the endless ovations. What began as a cry for independence slowly turns into a circus. And in 1971, a single journey to China and North Korea will change him and Romania forever. In 1971, Nicolae Ceaușescu travels to China and North Korea. Both countries are communist, like Romania, and all three share a deep distrust of the Soviet Union. But something hits Ceaușescu differently in these two nations. In Beijing, he watches millions chanting Mao's name, holding the little red book above their heads. In Pyongyang, he sees Kim Il-sung's portrait on every street, his statues in every square, and parades that seem endless. Soldiers, workers, and children marching in perfect rhythm. Ceaușescu is mesmerized. He writes in his diary, "The respect and unity of these nations come from their love for their leader." When he returns to Romania, he wants that same love for himself. That same year, he launches the July Theses, a political manifesto that reverses years of mild liberalization. From now on, he orders that art, literature, education, and science serve socialist ideology, glorifying the party, the state, and above all, himself. He fills every radio and television broadcast with his image. He instructs state television to extend applause until it feels endless. He commands that his portraits hang in every office, classroom, and factory hall. He forces schools to force students to memorize his speeches as sacred texts. He turns his own birthday into a national holiday. He orders television stations to air documentaries about his childhood, his genius, his vision. He demands to be addressed as the genius of the Carpathians, the Danube of thought, and the hero of the working class. He forces scientists to include Elena's name in their papers and inventions. She receives doctorates she never earned and appears at his side as the mother of the nation. By the late 1970s, Ceaușescu, much like Kim Il-sung, wants to project his image worldwide. To sustain the illusion of greatness, he turns to the West, to the IMF, the World Bank, and Western private banks to borrow billions in credit to modernize Romania. But instead of investing in productivity, he builds monuments. Under his systematization plan, Ceaușescu decides to redesign the country in its entirety. He orders the demolition of entire villages to clear space for his new socialist cities. The destruction is so vast that people nickname the demolition areas Ceaușima, a mix of Ceaușescu and Hiroshima, comparing his demolitions to World War II nuclear blasts. When churches stand in his way, and there are many, he orders them destroyed. But a few engineers, desperate not to see centuries of history wiped out, plead for alternatives. Eugeniu Iordachescu, one of Romania's top engineers at the time, proposes a solution to Ceaușescu himself. What if, instead of destroying these buildings, we lift and slide the entire buildings on rails? For how crazy this sounds, it works and Ceaușescu listens. Dozens of churches are spared, not because Ceaușescu wants to save them, but because his engineers found a way to obey his vision without fully obeying him. In other cases, when moving them proves really impossible, he orders apartment blocks to be built around them, taller to hide them entirely. Then in 1977, a massive earthquake strikes Bucharest. Almost 2,000 people die. For Ceaușescu, it becomes an opportunity. Instead of rebuilding homes for the survivors, he seizes the chance to redesign the capital in his own image. He clears the rubble and orders the construction of a colossal new city center, Central Civic. At its heart, he builds his greatest monument, the House of the People, today the heaviest building on Earth and the second largest administrative building in the world, after the Pentagon in the US. Ceaușescu personally oversees the project. To make room for it, he commands the demolition of 1/5 of Bucharest city center. 9,000 homes, 26 churches, and dozens of historic streets. He orders 700 architects and 20,000 workers to build it, using 1 million cubic meters of marble. A building 365,000 square meters large, with 1,100 rooms, larger in volume than the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. Ceaușescu calls it the new socialist heart of Romania. Elena, in the meantime, interferes in every major project. When engineers propose a metro station under the University Square for the students, the busiest intersection in Bucharest, she cuts the idea instantly. Let them walk. Her contempt for intellectuals, especially those capable of earning real degrees, is open. Students, teachers, doctors, she sees all of them as potential enemies because they are the first to question, hence the hardest to control. But once again, the engineers step in. Knowing the metro would have to exist one day, they design and build the university station anyway. In secret, hidden beneath layers of concrete, disguising it as service tunnels, waiting to uncover it in a freer time. One thing that could have already prompted the people to foresee Ceaușescu's extreme need for control over them appeared actually very early on. In 1968, for example, he decided that a population of just 20 million was not enough. He wanted 30 million. To achieve it, overnight, he issued Decree 770, banning both contraception and abortion. In factories, female workers were now suddenly subjected to compulsory gynecological checks. In offices, monitored by the so-called fertility supervisors. The police kept detailed records of every woman's menstrual cycle. Those who failed to become pregnant were questioned. Doctors performing abortions faced prison, and miscarriages were investigated as crimes. Women caught terminating a pregnancy were beaten, humiliated, and imprisoned. Within a single year, the birth rate nearly doubled. But the country, already strained, could not sustain it. Thousands of infants were abandoned in overcrowded orphanages. Rooms filled with metal cribs where children were tied down, neglected, and left to rock themselves to sleep to such a degree, Many would never learn to speak and develop mental disabilities. By the early 1980s, the loans used to finance Ceaușescu's monumental projects come due. $12 billion, half of Romania's GDP. The economy stalls. Ceaușescu had bet that oil exports would repay the debt. But when global oil prices collapse in 1979, that plan suddenly becomes impossible. With the bills now due, yet determined to prove that Romania can stand on its own, and that he, unlike other leaders, would never bow to the West, Ceaușescu orders that every cent of the debt be repaid immediately. But since Romania's currency has no value abroad, and its exports can't compete on international markets, he orders that everything physical in the country be sold: grain, meat, fruit, oil, coal, wood, steel, even electricity. Trains loaded with food and fuel begin leaving the country immediately. Instead of saving Romania, the plan bankrupts it completely. The shelves go empty, apartments go dark, water is rationed. In winter, heating is limited by decree. No apartment allowed to exceed 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. In hospitals, temperatures drop to 5 degrees. Blood bags freeze. Operations are done in coats, with flashlights held by nurses. Food is so scarce that people queue for hours in the snow, only to find nothing when their turn comes. In orphanages and care homes, children, the elderly, and the disabled suffer most because food deliveries stop coming. Some children escape, forming gangs of street kids known as boscătari, surviving by begging and stealing. Others take refuge in the city's sewers, the Aralaci, inside the underground tunnels that Ceaușescu had built as part of a centralized heating system meant to warm Bucharest from below, inhaling paint or glue from plastic bags to stay warm and forget hunger. Consumption falls so sharply that it returns to the 1930s pre-war levels. In the meantime, to keep order, as it has been for the past 2 decades, the Securitate, Romania's secret police, tightens its grip. Around 700,000 informants, in a country of just 23 million, report on their neighbors, co-workers, even family members. Conversations are monitored, phones are tapped, hidden microphones are planted in living and hotel rooms. After 9 p.m., the streets fall silent. A curfew, never officially announced, becomes understood. Anyone caught outside risks interrogation. Couples found living together unmarried are raided, sometimes beaten, their fingers broken, their fingernails torn out. Fear becomes the organizing principle of daily life. But by the late 1980s, even fear begins to fail. Factories stop paying wages, power cuts last half the day, and in the city of Timișoara, change begins. On December 16, 1989, protests erupt after authorities attempt to evict a local pastor, Laszlo Tokes, for criticizing the regime. Crowds gather. The army opens fire. Hundreds are killed in Timișoara. Ceaușescu denounces the unrest on national television as acts of vandalism, but it doesn't land.
În ultimele zile la Timișoara, în zilele de 16 și 17 decembrie, câteva grupuri de elemente huliganice au organizat o serie de manifestări și incidente, distrugând și jefuind o serie de clădiri.
Within days, demonstrations spread nationwide. Workers abandon their factories. Students flood the streets shouting, "Down with Ceaușescu!" On December 21st, Ceaușescu decides to address the nation live from the balcony of the Central Committee building. The speech that would become his last, as we've seen. Knowing the country is on edge, he tries to buy peace, announcing a 200 lei raise for workers.
Începând de la 1 ianuarie să majorăm în cursul anului viitor retribuția minimă de la 2000 la 2200 lei.
100 for pensioners.
Am hotărât să majorăm pensiile minime de la 800 la 900 lei.
A 10% general increase in salaries. A desperate gesture from a man who thinks the people can still be bought. But nobody cares. The next day, chaos resumes in Bucharest. Ceaușescu and Elena flee by helicopter from the roof of the Central Committee headquarters. But their escape doesn't last long. The army radios their helicopter. "You are no longer authorized to fly. Land, or we will shoot the helicopter down." Forced to descend, they touch down near Târgoviște, where they are captured and taken to a military garrison. For 3 days, the couple who once ruled 20 million people are held in unheated rooms, guarded by soldiers half their age, the same army that once saluted them. On December 25, 1989, Christmas Day, a country's symbolic rebirth, the old man and woman who once decided who lived and who starved now stand trembling before a few officers and a camera that records them. Some soldiers argue over how to execute them. Others hesitate. A few step forward to tie their hands menacingly. The couple refuses, demanding to die together, defiant or simply unable to believe it's over. The court grants it as their last wish. Minutes later, they are led outside into the snow. Elena shouts insults. Nicolae hums the Internationale, the anthem of the revolution that devoured the country, him and his wife. A burst of gunfire, then silence. 2 fragile bodies collapse to the ground. The same voices that once commanded a nation, now powerless. A doctor kneels, checks their pulse. It's over. In 1990, after their execution, Romania's economy collapses. GDP drops, then drops again the next year, and again the year after. For 10 years, factories keep closing. Economic conditions worsen drastically, recovering only around 2003. Yet in the years that follow, fragments of classified reports and testimonies from within the army would begin to surface. Was it really a people's revolution? The uprising in Timișoara had started spontaneously, no doubt about that, but the speed with which it spread nationwide was abnormal. The Securitate, once omnipresent, suddenly did nothing. Army divisions switched sides overnight. It all seemed too coordinated to be accidental. Because of this, many now believe the Ceaușescus were not merely overthrown, but scapegoated. High-ranking generals and party elites, in fact, may have grown tired of Ceaușescu's 2 decades of isolationism and economic ruin. By allowing, or even hastening, the chaos, they might have thought it was the best way to cleanse their country in the eyes of the West, to present a new, reformed Romania overnight. The people's anger was real. The revolution was real indeed. But behind it, others may have been pulling the strings, harder than anyone could imagine. Today, Romania is a member of the European Union, a democracy with a stable currency and open borders. But the memory of Ceaușescu still divides. For some Romanians, especially those who lived through it all, his death was a terrible mistake. For others, a necessary pain before recovery.